Deployment. In this section, we're going to talk about how we design our installation, and we're actually going to do an installation on a server farm for a web front end, app server, and our SQL server. We're going to take a deep dive into how to create the farm, add services, and just go through a basic installation of SharePoint 2016 server. In this video, we're going to talk about designing an installation. We need to look at our administrative accounts, service accounts, prerequisites, PowerShell scripts that we're going to use during the deployment, and get ready for our installation. First thing we need to look at is administrative accounts. We need to make sure that we have these accounts created in Active Directory, and these accounts are ready for us to use with good passwords and have been added to our servers as needed. The SharePoint admin account should only have limited access in the SQL server. It also should be an admin on every SharePoint server. Within SharePoint servers, SharePoint farm account will get deployed for what security rights it needs based on when you actually deploy the SharePoint farm. So you won't have to do much with the farm account. The farm account will get deployed and get those security roles activated or placed into place by the admin account as things are created within the farm. The SQL admin account will be needed on the SQL server side as an overarching admin account for SQL Server. Service accounts. We need service accounts for web applications, service applications, and one of the things I do is also split out some of the services because they all need to be separated. When I say separated, I mean each service application, depending on what that service application is, may need a service account to actually run the app pool for that service. So in my installations, I usually use separate service accounts for user profiles and for search. I also use separate service accounts for my web applications and have separate application pools for those web applications. We also need a replication account to actually pull in our identities from Active Directory. This account only needs to be read-only and just a replication of Active Directory, pulling those identities into SharePoint. We also need a hybrid connectivity account. This account will be used to create the connectivity between the hybrid Office 365 tenant and your SharePoint 2016 server. Also not mentioned here is you also need to have cache accounts, which would be added to your web applications for caching on those web applications when users are using those. Also not mentioned here, you also need cache accounts placed on all your web applications, and I usually use separate accounts for those as well for caching on the sites that you are creating. Prerequisites. Some of the things we need to get in place as we configure our servers. We need to have our operating system updates. So we need to go ahead and install those updates before we even start the installation. We need to make sure we have a SharePoint ISO or the installation files for SharePoint on the server. I usually spin up the ISO. I copy those installation files to my SharePoint server. The reason why I do that is it just gives me a simpler installation for SharePoint, as I do have to reboot during the installation process. SP updates, we need to have those ready. If you want to get these installed as you install SharePoint, you need to download those SP updates and actually add them to the updates folder within the installation folder. Feature packs as well. If you would like to get those installed as you are installing SharePoint, you need to add those to the updates folder as well. The feature pack, you would only need feature pack 2, which will also include feature pack 1. So there's no need to have both. The CLI config is the client config that you use to actually create a SQL alias on your server, which would then give you the ability, if your SQL server had crashed or something happened with the server, you could spin up another server and restore the databases and be able to bring back your SharePoint farm pretty easily. I've had to do this before, and it does work. You may have some slight troubleshooting to do, but most of the time it works pretty seamlessly. Database updates. You need to make sure that your temp DB size is pretty big, or make sure that you're you're configuring it at a nice size level, because SharePoint does use that indirectory to store objects. Your model database also, you need to make sure that database is a pretty decent size when starting your installation of SharePoint's server. This database actually helps you when every time you create a content database, the model database is used to create that content database. The initial size is very small, so it's in the megabytes. You may want to bring that up to to a decent size, maybe 1 gig, to start with. And then as you go, use auto growth or something, some type of database maintenance to actually, grow that database as you need it. You also need to make sure that your collation databases are correct. If you're using your SQL DBA to actually create your databases for you, make sure that your collation for your databases is correct, and that you're not creating them incorrectly, because your databases will not work correctly. The firewall configuration, you want to make sure that your ports are open. You want to make sure you have your in and out settings for your firewall correct. If you're using outside services like online server, you want to make sure that those ports are open on your SharePoint farm so those services can actually run successfully. A naming convention, you want to make sure that you have something in mind. I always write down what exactly I'm going to do for the naming of my databases, naming of my web applications, my topology for my site collections, and just pretty much anything that I'm naming. I want to make sure that I'm naming it how I want it, so I know what it is. I've been in plenty of places where you have databases that are named incorrectly, and you end up either deleting something that you shouldn't have, or have a backup of something that you don't know what it is, you don't know where it went, because you've changed the name during the process of having SharePoint and not done your due diligence from the beginning. So always, plan out your naming convention. Make sure that you have stuff. You're an admin, so make sure you have things, in line, so you know what they are and why they're named that way. Load balancing, if you're using NLB, you want to make sure that you do some research into it. I think I touched on this in one of the prior videos, but you want to make sure that you have the correct configuration for your NLB. If you're using hardware load balancing, you want to do the same. You want to make sure that the hardware load balancer is actually doing what it needs to do, for your load balancing of your web applications. Security, if you're going to use Kerberos, the time to do it is right now. You want to make sure that those identities that are going to be doing delegation within the SharePoint site for services or web applications, that you go ahead and get that done now and have it, available before you start your installation. The farm configuration script is pretty similar to the 2013 script. The only option that's changed is the min role. So you do have to add what type of role you want within the PowerShell script for it actually to run correctly. You want to run this script as administrator. You want to use the SQL alias name within your script. You want to name the config database and the content database for your central administration, and put the port of your central administration into the script. In this video, we covered all the areas of what we need to do before we start our installation and deployment, and the administrative tasks that we want to start before we start our deployment.